Hey everyone, tonight we're going back to the Five and Dime, and I've been looking forward to this one for a while. We've got a morning spent inside a Woolworths, or a Kresge's, or a McCrory's, moving through the aisles the way a practice shopper always did, because there was absolutely a right way to shop a Five and Dime and a wrong way, and the regulars knew the difference. We have got the story of Samuel Woolworth and the peculiar, stubborn, almost accidental genius that built one of the most beloved retail empires in American history. We have got a day behind the counter, on your feet in your uniform, working the lunch counter of a Five and Dime in 1963, which turns out to be considerably more complicated than it looks in the photographs. And then we have got a closer look at what the Five and Dime actually was underneath the cheerful red and gold signage, because the price points were real, and the community feeling was real, and also some other things were happening in those stores that the promotional materials did not tend to linger on. So before you get settled, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy spending time here. And leave me a comment letting me know where you are watching from and what time it is wherever you are. I love seeing that. Now get comfortable, maybe pull a blanket up, and let us go back together. It is a Saturday morning in 1962 and you are already out the door before the coffee has properly finished working. The air outside has that particular early autumn quality. Not quite cold enough for a heavy coat, but cool enough to make you glad you grabbed a cardigan, and the sidewalk is the kind of busy that only happens on a Saturday. Mothers with strollers and older women in good shoes, and teenagers moving in small clusters with nowhere particular to be, but everywhere to go. You have your list, not the grocery list, not the hardware store list, the Five and Dime list, which is a different kind of list entirely. The Five and Dime list has a texture to it that other lists do not. It has items on it that exist in a category somewhere between need and want, between practical errand and small affordable pleasure. Buttons to replace the ones that came off the winter coat. A package of bobby pins because the bathroom drawer has somehow consumed every single one you've ever owned. Thread in a colour that matches nothing specific but might be useful. Possibly a lipstick. Possibly a small bottle of evening in Paris cologne if the price is right, which at a Five and Dime it almost certainly will be. The Five and Dime list is the list you make when you want to come home with something, when you want the particular satisfaction of small purchases that add up to a feeling of having taken care of things. You can smell the store before you see it. That is not a poetic exaggeration. The Five and Dime has a smell, specific and unmistakable, a combination of things that do not obviously go together and yet have blended, over years of foot traffic and merchandise turnover, into something that is simply the smell of the place. There is a sweetness underneath everything, from the candy counter near the entrance, the bulk bins of orange slices and chocolate-covered peanuts, and malted milk balls sitting behind glass, their scent drifting outward like a standing invitation. There is something slightly waxy from the candles and the floor polish. There is the faint chemical undertone of the cosmetics aisle, powder and acetone and something floral and synthetic. And underneath all of it, there is the particular warm smell of a well-used public space, wood and metal, and the indefinable accumulation of 1,000 different people passing through every single day. The door opens with a bell, or sometimes not a bell, but just the particular sound of a heavy glass door swinging on commercial hinges, and you step inside and the Saturday morning crowd is already here ahead of you. This is not a surprise. The regulars know that Saturday morning is the time to shop if you want the counters fully stocked, and the sales girls not yet exhausted by the afternoon rush. You pause for just a moment at the entrance, the way practice shoppers always do, even if they do not consciously realise they are doing it, because there is a layout to navigate and your body knows it. If you'd rather listen with your eyes closed, find us on Spotify, link in the description. The Five and Dime is not a store you wander through randomly. That is not how it works. That is not how any of the regulars work it, and you have been shopping here long enough to understand the logic. The candy counter is at the front, always at the front, and this is not an accident. It pulls you in, it catches the children, it puts something sweet in your hand or in your mind before you have even started the serious business of shopping. The cosmetics are usually near the front too, along the left wall in most Woolworths, arranged with a care that suggests someone thought hard about what a woman sees first when she walks through the door. Then there are the notions, the sewing supplies and hair accessories and small personal items, arranged in a long aisle that runs toward the back, then housewares, then seasonal merchandise displayed on freestanding tables in the middle of the floor. Then the lunch counter at the back or along one side, depending on the store's particular geography, and the lunch counter has its own gravity entirely. You do not head for the lunch counter first. That is an arrival destination, not a starting point. You head for the notions. The notions aisle in a 1960s five and dime is a marvel of dense, careful arrangement. Everything is on cards or in packages or hanging from small metal hooks, and everything is priced to be reachable. Not cheap in the sense of poorly made, but cheap in the sense that the price does not require a decision. A card of buttons is 19 cents. A package of needles is a dime. Rickrack trim in white or red or yellow is 15 cents for 3 yards. Seam binding, hook and eye closures. Elastic by the yard or already cut to waist length and packaged. Snaps in silver or black. Iron-on patches in an assortment of shapes. Hem tape in cream or white or black. You know exactly where all of these things are because the notions aisle has been arranged the same way for as long as you can remember, and Woolworths or Kresge's or McCrory's does not move things around just for novelty. The regulars would be annoyed, and the regulars are the whole point. You find the thread you need almost immediately, a warm beige that will work for the hem you've been meaning to fix since August. You find bobby pins in a 3-pack for $1, which is slightly more than you wanted to spend, but you know from experience that 3-packs last longer than 1-packs, because somehow you feel less licensed to lose them when they came in a quantity. This is the psychology of the five and dime working on you, and you are aware of it in a distant, unconcerned way. You're not bothered by it. You add the thread and the bobby pins to the small red plastic basket you picked up at the entrance, and you move on. There is an etiquette to shopping the five and dime that no one wrote down in any manual, but that every regular understood without being told. You do not touch the merchandise unless you intend to examine it seriously. You do not block the aisle while you deliberate. If you are undecided between 2 items, you step aside and let the woman behind you pass. You do not ask a salesgirl to help you find something, unless you have already looked and genuinely cannot locate it, because the salesgirls are busy and the floor is understood to be its own navigation system for anyone who shops here with any regularity. You do not linger at a counter that someone else is actively being served at, not unless the store is crowded and there is simply nowhere else to wait, in which case you wait at a respectful distance and make it clear by your posture that you're not trying to push in. These were not rules that anyone articulated. They were simply the operating conditions of a shared space that functioned on a certain kind of mutual understanding. You move from notions to the cosmetics wall, which is where your shopping rhythm changes slightly. The notions aisle is efficient. You know what you need, you find it, you move on. The cosmetics section is slower. This is not inefficiency. This is the nature of the merchandise. Cosmetics invite deliberation. They invite the small pleasure of looking, of considering, of picking something up and reading the copy on the packaging and putting it back and picking up the next one. The five and dime cosmetics counter is not the department store beauty counter, with its glass cases and white-coated saleswomen and the subtle social pressure to justify your interest. At the five and dime, you can stand at the lipstick display for 4 minutes without anyone asking if you need assistance in a tone that suggests they would prefer you did not. The lipsticks are in a rotating stand or a low-flat display, and the shades have names that have been decided by a committee of people who clearly felt that the name of a lipstick was its own advertisement. Pink Lightning, Coral Sunrise, Cherries in the Snow is a Revlon shade sold in finer stores, but the five and dime has its own versions of that aspiration, its own reds with names that gesture toward glamour at a price point that does not require glamour to be your whole budget. You pick up a coral shade and uncap the tube and look at the colour. At the five and dime, you are allowed to do this. There is no lipstick tester precisely, but there is an understood tolerance for examining the product in daylight before you commit, as long as you do not make a mess of it and you put the cap back on properly when you're done. You put the coral back. You pick up a rose. You consider it against your wrist, though wrists are not lips and everyone knows this, but it is the motion, it is the ritual of consideration, and that has its own satisfying quality. You add the rose to your basket, 29 cents. At a department store, the equivalent shade would be $1.25, and it would come in a heavier case with a little mirror inside, and it would feel more luxurious in your hand, and it would be essentially the same lipstick, you know this. The five and dime regular always knows this. That is part of what makes the five and dime shopping feel like a small private victory. The hair accessories are on the same wall, a little further down, and you spend a few minutes here because you need nothing specific, but the display is thorough, and there is always the possibility of something you did not know you needed. Snap barrettes in tortoiseshell and black, foam rollers for home setting, rat-tail combs, wide tooth combs, a brush with a cushion base, invisible nets in a shade called brown-black, hairpins in a cardboard sleeve. You do not need any of this, and then you see a package of small roller pins, the kind with the little rubber tips, and you remember that you have been meaning to replace yours since the rubber tips started cracking, and you add them to the basket with the quiet satisfaction of remembering something you had almost forgotten. You are moving toward the centre of the store now, where the seasonal merchandise has been arranged on freestanding tables with hand-lettered signs. It is autumn, so there is a display of Halloween items, small decorations and paper party goods, crepe paper in orange and black, little bags of candy corn in cellophane, a card of paper skeletons that accordion out for hanging. Next to that, a table of flannel pieces by the yard, sold from bolts that the salesgirl will cut for you, in plaids and checks that suggest warmth and the coming cold. Beside that, a display of Christmas items that arrived, as Christmas items always do, exactly 3 weeks before anyone felt emotionally prepared for Christmas. You stop at the seasonal table because you cannot help it. This is the Five and Dime's greatest talent, its ability to put something in front of you that you did not plan to want, and to price it at a level where the internal argument against buying it loses before it properly starts. You pick up a set of 4 small pillar candles in autumn colours, ochre and rust and cream, packaged together for 49 cents. You do not strictly need candles. You put them in the basket, a small, specific pleasure. 49 cents is the exact right price for a small, specific pleasure on a Saturday morning. The centre of the Five and Dime is also where the stationery lives, and you slow here too, because stationery is one of those categories that replenishes endlessly and inexpensively at the Five and Dime in a way it does not anywhere else. Composition books in black and white marbled covers, spiral notebooks in assorted colours, loose-leaf paper in packages of 100 sheets, envelopes in various sizes, writing tablets, the long ones with the blue lines and the red margin, which your mother called tablets, and which you still call tablets because that is what they are. Ballpoint pens in 3-packs, pencils in 12-packs already sharpened, carbon paper, still in use in 1962 by enough households that the Five and Dime stocks it without apology. You add a writing tablet to the basket and a package of envelopes, and you realise your basket is getting heavy in a way that suggests you have been here longer than you planned, which is always what happens, which is something every regular knows will happen and accounts for in the loosest possible way. You did not plan to spend an hour here. You will spend an hour here. The Five and Dime is that kind of place. The back of the store is where the lunch counter lives, a long curve of chrome and red vinyl stools that is fully occupied at 10:30 on a Saturday morning, because the Saturday morning coffee crowd at the Five and Dime lunch counter is its own institution, its own community, with its own regulars and its own rhythms that you can observe but only partially understand unless you are one of them. You do not sit at the lunch counter this morning. You have errands to finish, but you pause at the edge of it for a moment, just long enough to feel its warmth, the smell of coffee and grilled bread and something sweet in a pan, the sound of cups being set down on formica and spoons against ceramic and conversation happening at the comfortable low volume of people who are not in any particular hurry. Then you move back toward the registers, which are positioned near the front of the store, 3 of them in a row with hand-cranked cash registers that make a specific mechanical sound when the drawer opens, a sound you've heard so many times it has become part of the ambient vocabulary of your Saturdays. The line is short. You set your basket on the counter, and the salesgirl begins to ring through your items, calling out each price in a practiced, even voice, and you watch the register and do the mental addition alongside her because that is what you always do. Because knowing the total before she says it is a small test, you set yourself every time, and you almost always pass. The total is $1.71. You hand over $2 bills from your coin purse and accept 29 cents in change. The salesgirl wraps your items in the thin white paper that Five and Dime clerks always wrap purchases in, a particular folding technique that is faster and neater than it looks, and slides them into a small paper bag with the store's name on it. You say thank you, she says have a good day, You step back out into the Saturday morning with your bag and your change and the particular feeling of having done a useful and satisfying thing. That feeling, that quiet, specific satisfaction is not an accident. It is the whole point, and it took 100 years of American retail history to get it exactly right. The thing about the 5 and dime list is that it requires a different kind of memory than other lists. The grocery list is a document of necessity. You consult it against the shelves and you work through it item by item, and you are done when the cart is full and the list is crossed off. The hardware store list is specific and often slightly anxious, because hardware store items have specific part numbers and dimensions, and getting the wrong one means a second trip, which nobody wants. The 5 and dime list is neither of these. The 5 and dime list is more of a starting point, a loose orientation toward a category of need that is then expanded and refined by the experience of actually being in the store and seeing what is there and remembering what you meant to get last time and forgot. You've been keeping 5 and dime lists in one form or another since you were old enough to go to the store with your mother and graduate from the candy counter to the notions aisle. You kept them in your head when you were young, a running mental register of things that needed replacing, or things that caught your eye in someone else's bathroom and seemed worth investigating at a place that sold bathroom items at a reasonable price. You began keeping them on paper when you had your own household to manage, and the mental register started getting crowded with the grocery list and the hardware list, and the school supply list, and the list of things that needed to be done to the house before winter. The 5 and dime list lives in the back of your day planner, written in pencil, with additions made over the course of the week whenever you notice something running low, or something that needs replacing, or something that might, at a nickel or a dime, be worth trying. Today's list has 7 items, which is a medium-sized list. Under 5 is a quick trip. Over 10 starts to feel like an expedition. 7 is a Saturday morning, an hour, maybe a little more if you get drawn into the seasonal display or the cosmetics, which you often do because the cosmetics section of the 5 and dime is genuinely worth spending time in. Not because the merchandise is unique or high-end, but because the low price and the browsing-friendly arrangement make it possible to consider things you would not otherwise consider. To pick up a lipstick in a colour you would not normally choose, and look at it in the light and decide whether you might be the kind of person who wears coral. You're usually not, but the considering is pleasant and costs nothing. You know the store the way you know a neighbourhood, not through formal study but through accumulated familiarity. You know which aisles are which. You know that the thread is on the left side of the notions aisle, organised by colour family, and that the blues and greens tend to run out faster than the rest, so the stock on those is thinner, and you have to look through more carefully. You know that the bobby pins are in the hair accessories section, which is past the notions, past the small personal care items, and that they come in at least 3 different package configurations, and the single pack is misleading, because it contains fewer than you think from the front. You know that the cosmetic section smells like a combination of powder and acetone and something slightly floral and synthetic, and that the smell hits you when you turn the corner from notions, and you have had a moment of genuine pleasure from that particular combination of smells since you were 12 years old, and that has not changed. What you're less likely to articulate, because it operates below the level of conscious thought for anyone who has shopped a 5 and dime with any regularity, is the social code of the store and how naturally you move inside it. The code is not written anywhere. It is transmitted through observation and experience. You absorbed it gradually, first by watching your mother and the other women who shopped with her, then by navigating the store on your own and making the small missteps that teach you the rules as clearly as any instruction could. You blocked an aisle once, standing in the middle of the thread section, trying to match a beige that kept reading slightly different in the fluorescent light than it had in the daylight at home, and 2 women had to say excuse me to get past you before you registered the obstruction you had become, and you moved to the side and have never blocked an aisle since. You learned through one uncomfortable experience at the candy counter that you do not help yourself to the bulk candy by reaching over the glass, even if you can see the scoop and the bags, because the candy counter has its own service protocol, and the girl behind it will serve you. You learned that asking a sales girl where something is, when you have clearly been in the store before and should be able to find it yourself, is something best done with an apologetic tone that acknowledges, this is probably obvious and you are sorry for the interruption. These are the small social competencies of the 5 and dime, and they operate invisibly because everyone who shops the store regularly has learned them, and because the store is pleasant when they are observed and slightly awkward when they are not. The candy counter near the entrance deserves a moment of its own. You pass it every time you come in, and you stop at it approximately 1 time in 3, not because you make a decision to stop at it, but because the smell and the visual pull of the bulk bin slows your step, and before you have fully decided anything, you're already looking at the orange slices and the chocolate-covered peanuts, and the malted milk balls and the bridge mix and the sugared orange peel that you almost always mean to try and almost never actually buy. The candy counter at the 5 and dime is one of the era's great sensory experiences, though no one has ever called it that because it is candy at a 5 and dime, and not the sort of thing that gets named or preserved or written about in the way that more obviously significant things get written about. The glass bins with their hinged metal lids, and the scoops hanging from the side, and the small waxed paper bags that the girl fills and weighs on the scale that is bolted to the counter and that gives the price to the nearest nickel. A £1/4 of orange slices for a dime, chocolate-covered peanuts in a £3/4 bag for a quarter. These are not prices that require a decision. They are prices that require only wanting, and you usually do. Today you stop and look at the orange slices, orange-flavoured gelatin coated in granulated sugar, and you decide the way you almost always decide when you look at orange slices, which is to get a small bag because they are the sort of thing that is better in theory than in practice, and you do not need a large bag of something that is better in theory than in practice. You ask the girl for a small bag of orange slices. She scoops them out, estimates, puts the bag on the scale, adds 2 more to bring it up, and tells you 6 cents. You pay with a dime and accept 4 cents in change. You fold the top of the paper bag and put it in your purse to deal with later, along with the small collection of decisions your shopping morning has already generated. The Formica countertops of the 5 and dimes display areas deserve some consideration, because Formica is a post-war material that has become so thoroughly associated with mid-century American domestic and commercial life that it is impossible to reconstruct the visual texture of the era without it. Formica came in many colours and patterns, but the 5 and dimes particular Formica tended toward the neutral and the practical, a speckled grey or beige or white that showed the merchandise without competing with it, that wiped clean with a damp cloth, and that had a slight sheen in the fluorescent light that made everything on it look slightly more official than it might look on a wooden surface. The display counters where the cosmetics lived, where the jewellery was laid out, where the small household items were arranged, had this Formica quality to them, and it was part of what made the 5 and dime look like a store rather than a market. Orderly, bounded. The merchandise contained within a specific space, and priced with a specificity that left nothing ambiguous. The jewellery counter is one of the places you tend to move through quickly, because you are not a jewellery shopper in the way that some women are jewellery shoppers, but you always look as you pass. The 5 and dime jewellery was not expensive jewellery, and did not pretend to be. It was clip-on earrings in bright colours, brooch pins with rhinestones, charm bracelets with small enamelled charms, pearl button earrings in cream or white that looked, at a few feet's distance, almost indistinguishable from the real thing and cost 49 cents for a pair. Bangle bracelets in gold tone or silver tone or coloured enamel. Hair clips that doubled as jewellery with their little rhinestone decorations. None of it was precious in the material sense. All of it was satisfying in the 5 and dime sense, the sense that something decorative was available to you at a price that did not require you to justify it to yourself or to anyone else. You pause today at the clip-on earrings because you have been looking for a pair in a warm amber tone for a coat you have that needs something at the collar, and you find them almost immediately, a pair of oval clips in an amber resin that catches the fluorescent light in a way that reads as genuine warmth rather than cheapness. 59 cents. You add them to your basket. You're now over your original budget for the trip by 48 cents, which is the amount by which 5 and dime trips consistently exceed their original budgets, and which is also the amount by which they consistently feel worth it. Moving through the houseware section is a different kind of shopping than the notions or the cosmetics. Housewares requires a more considered inspection because housewares items are more consequential, in the sense that a lipstick that turns out to be the wrong shade has cost you 29 cents and a moment of mild disappointment. But a vegetable peeler that turns out to be poorly made has cost you 39 cents and a vegetable peeling experience that is going to be irritating for years. The 5 and dime housewares were not prestigious merchandise. They were functional items, kitchen tools and household gadgets, and small appliances at the lower price tier, and their quality varied in a way that the experienced shopper understood and navigated by applying a certain practical assessment to each item before it went into the basket. You pick up a vegetable brush, examine the bristles, squeeze the handle, decide the bristles are firm enough and the handle is solid enough, and the 49 cents is reasonable. You add it to the basket because your current vegetable brush has been shedding bristles into the potato bowl for 2 months and this is not ideal. Beside the vegetable brush there is a display of small kitchen items in a variety of bright colours, egg beaters and spatulas and wooden spoons and measuring cups in sets, and you slow here because the measuring cups catch your eye. A set of 4 in graduated sizes in a warm turquoise that is very much the colour of 1962 at its most confident, the same turquoise that shows up in kitchen appliances and bathroom tile and automobile interiors and holiday wrapping paper. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Oh, and if you'd rather just listen, we're on Spotify too, link in the description. You already have measuring cups. They are the functional aluminum kind that will last indefinitely and have nothing wrong with them. But these turquoise ones are very pleasing to look at, and the set is 79 cents, and you stand here for a moment and run the internal calculation that the 5 and dime is specifically designed to generate, which is 79 cents is not very much money. And it is not. 79 cents is a truly modest sum, and yet you do have measuring cups. You put the turquoise set back. This is also a practiced 5 and dime skill, the ability to look at something that costs almost nothing and conclude that you do not need it anyway. You have learned this skill the way everyone who shops a 5 and dime regularly has to learn it, by buying too many things that cost almost nothing and adding them up at the end of the month and understanding that almost nothing is still something, added together, and the adding up matters even when the individual items do not. The 5 and dime's genius at removing the friction from individual purchases required, over time, that the regular shopper develop her own friction, her own check on the ease of accumulation. You have yours, it works most of the time. The amber earrings are in the basket. The turquoise measuring cups are back on the display. This is what self-knowledge looks like at the 5 and dime. The seasonal display in the middle of the 5 and dime floor is worth more than a passing glance on a Saturday in late September, because the seasonal display is where the 5 and dime sense of the calendar lives most vividly. Woolworth and the other chains understood very early that the retail calendar was not a fixed thing, that there were peaks and troughs in shopping activity that corresponded to the rhythms of the American year, and that a store which positioned itself correctly relative to those rhythms could sustain a level of traffic that a store ignoring the calendar could not. The seasonal display was how the 5 and dime observed the year, not in the grand departmental way of the larger stores, with their elaborate holiday floor sets and their window displays that took a team a week to install, but in the practical, accessible, immediately purchasable way that was the 5 and dime's particular gift. In September, the display is transitional, 1 foot in summer and 1 in autumn, with the summer clearance items relegated to a back corner and the new fall merchandise arranged with more confidence at the front. The Halloween items have just arrived, and they are modest, in keeping with a holiday that in 1962 is still primarily a children's occasion, rather than the full-scale adult participation event it will later become. Paper decorations in orange and black, folded flat in cellophane packages, plastic pumpkin pails for trick-or-treating, packets of small wrapped candies sold by the bag for handing out to neighbourhood children, wax fangs and wax lips in bins near the candy counter. A selection of dime store costumes in the costume aisle, which is a temporary arrangement installed on a rack near the seasonal display, consisting of superhero suits in rayon and cotton blends that will not survive a cold October evening with much dignity, but that cost $1.25 and solve the problem of the child who does not have a homemade costume and cannot explain why they need one. Next to the Halloween items, and already generating a small but steady customer interest, is the first suggestion of Christmas. This is not a full Christmas display, not yet. The full commitment will come in late October, when the seasonal tables will be entirely given over to the holiday, and the chrome fixtures near the entrance will be decorated with something tinsel adjacent. What exists in late September is more of a preview, a soft introduction, some holiday cards in a small rotating rack, a selection of ribbon and wrapping paper in patterns that gesture toward the season without committing to it entirely, and a small array of ornament hooks and tinsel garlands in packages that a woman who is thinking ahead, and there are always women at the 5 and dime who are thinking ahead, might purchase now rather than in the competitive crush of November. You have never been a Christmas in September person, and you're not starting today. But you pause at the wrapping paper display and look at the patterns, because good wrapping paper at 25 cents for a large roll is something that can run out unexpectedly, and buying it in September when the 5 and dime has the full selection is better than buying it in December when the 5 and dime has whatever is left. You select a roll in a geometric pattern, red and white, which will work for Christmas and also for winter birthdays, which your nephew has in January, and which always suffer from being wrapped in leftover Christmas paper, which he's still too young to notice, but which you notice and would prefer to avoid. You add it to the basket. The basket is now genuinely heavy. This is always how it goes. The stationery section has recently been extended, or perhaps just reorganised, to include a small selection of greeting cards. Greeting cards at the 5 and dime occupy a specific cultural niche that is different from both the full-line greeting card stores that are beginning to appear in some shopping areas and the limited selection at the drugstore. The 5 and dime cards are not the elaborate die-cut affairs with the satin ribbons and the verses and elaborate script that Hallmark sells in the department store. They are simpler, smaller, less expensive and more direct. Birthday cards with a straightforward message and an appropriate illustration. Get well cards that say what get well cards say, without additional embellishment. Thinking of you cards in a colour appropriate to the sentiment. They cost 10 cents for a standard card, 15 cents for a larger one with a small decoration, and they are useful in the way that something you need regularly at a low cost is useful, which is to say they are very useful indeed. You pick up a birthday card for your aunt, whose birthday is in 2 weeks, and a get well card for a neighbour who has been home with something respiratory since the first of the month. The birthday card has a small illustration of flowers in watercolour style, and a verse that is warm without being syrupy. The get well card is simple, just the words in a clear hand on a pale background. You add both to the basket with the satisfaction of having thought of something you might otherwise have remembered at the last minute and had to handle in a worse way. The checkout at a 5 and dime in 1962 is worth some attention as a moment in itself, because it has a particular quality that distinguishes it from other shopping experiences of the era. The register is a national cash register, the standard commercial machine of the period, tall and chrome-faced with a row of keys in black, and the particular mechanism that produces a specific musical mechanical sound when the operator strikes the keys and the total is computed and the drawer is opened. The sound of this register is as much a part of the 5 and dime sensory environment as the candy counter smell, and it has a satisfying finality to it, a note of completion, the ringing up done, the total established, the transaction ready to close. The salesgirl at the register in a busy 5 and dime during the Saturday morning rush is working at a pace that looks unhurried because she is experienced, but that is actually quite fast. She takes your items from the basket without setting the basket on the counter, which would create a bottleneck, and arranges them in a brief cluster on the counter surface beside the register. She calls out each price as she rings it in, not because this is required, but because it is courtesy, because it allows the customer to follow along and verify and does not produce the moment of slight anxiety that a register total emerging without narration can produce in a customer who's been doing mental arithmetic and is not certain her calculation matches the machine's. The calling out is a small professional decision, one that someone made at some point in the training and that propagated forward because it worked, because it made customers feel the transaction was being handled fairly and transparently even when every price was already marked on the merchandise. She folds your items in the thin white paper with the practiced speed of someone who has done this thousands of times, and the folding is efficient and neat without being showy. The paper bag with the store name printed on it has a certain officialness to it, a branding that carries the purchase out into the world as a mild advertisement for where it came from. You carry it the same way every week, slightly cupped in the hand so the items do not shift and the bag does not crumple, and you come out through the door into the Saturday air with your total spent and your list crossed off, and the particular feeling of a morning usefully completed. That feeling is the 5 and dime's real product, the thing underneath the thread and the lipstick and the bobby pins, the feeling of having been somewhere that worked, that functioned as it was supposed to function, that had what you needed and nothing about the experience of getting it was irritating or complicated or condescending. The 5 and dime's great success was in making the practical errand feel, if not exactly pleasurable, at least not unpleasant. at least capable of containing small pleasures within the practical necessity. The orange slices, the amber earrings, the moment at the cosmetics wall with the coral lipstick, these are not grand things. They are the kind of small, specific, reliably available pleasures that mid-century American working women were very good at finding inside the ordinary obligations of their days, and the five and dime was one of the places that reliably offered them. The feeling does not disappear on the walk home. It rides alongside you in the paper bag, in the small weight of the bobby pins and the thread and the lipstick and the candles and the envelopes and the writing tablet. It is not the feeling of having spent money. It is the feeling of having spent money well. There is a difference, and anyone who shopped the five and dime with any regularity understood it in their bones, even if they never put it into words quite like that. What you bought this morning was practical mostly. The thread and the bobby pins and the roller pins were genuine needs, items that had appeared on a list and been crossed off a list. The lipstick was an indulgence, but a modest one, under 30 cents. The candles were an impulse, but a small one, 49 cents. The stationery was a mild overage on need, since your current tablet had 12 pages left in it, but tablets run out, and it is always better to have one waiting. The total cost of your Saturday morning was $1.71, and in that $1.71 you had accomplished something that the five and dime's particular genius had made possible. You had shopped properly, with the particular mix of efficiency and pleasure and small luxury and practical sense that the five and dime had been designed over generations of refinement to produce. Every item in your basket, every item on every shelf in that store, had been priced at a level that put the decision below the threshold of genuine financial consequence. This was not an accident of the market. It was the whole operating philosophy, the founding idea, the thing that distinguished the five and dime from every other kind of store in America, and made it, for the better part of a century, the place where ordinary people learn to shop for themselves. The store you just walked through is the direct descendant of an idea that seemed absurd when it was first proposed, an idea that suggested you could sell goods at a fixed, impossibly low price point, not loss leaders designed to pull customers in for higher margin items, but genuinely priced at a nickel or a dime and still build a profitable business. In 1979, that idea was tested by a man from upstate New York who had failed enough times at retail to understand what he was doing wrong and was stubborn enough to keep going anyway. His name was Frank Winfield Woolworth, and what he built was not just a store, it was a new grammar for how Americans spent money. But the man and the mission come next, and they deserve the full weight of the story. For now, you're still on the sidewalk, Saturday morning bag in hand, the smell of the five and dime still faintly on your coat, the change from $2 still in your coin purse. The sun has come up fully now, and the street is properly busy, and somewhere behind you the five and dime is still open, still full, still doing exactly what it has always done, being the kind of place where $1.71 is enough to make a morning feel like something worthwhile. You pause at the corner, your bag is not heavy, but it has a satisfying weight. You head home. Frank Winfield Woolworth was not, by any ordinary measure, a promising candidate to revolutionize American retail. He was nervous in social situations. He was not particularly eloquent. He grew up on a farm in Jefferson County, New York, the kind of upstate New York that is very far from anywhere and very clear about that fact, and he spent his early years doing what farm boys did, which was work hard and wonder whether there was something else out there that might suit him better. There was something restless in him, some dissatisfaction with the geography of his future as it seemed to be laid out. And at 21 he went to work as a clerk in a dry goods store in Watertown, New York. Not because it was his dream, but because it was an option, and options were not something Woolworth had in abundance. He was not at first a talented clerk. He was shy with customers, uncertain in his manner, prone to a kind of quiet anxiety that made the social demands of retail feel genuinely difficult. His employer at the time, a man named William Moore who ran a dry goods concern in Watertown, was not particularly impressed. There is some evidence, pieced together from the accounts of people who knew him in those years, that Moore considered letting him go more than once. Woolworth himself seems to have been aware of his shortcomings and was working on them with a kind of desperate, determined energy that would later become the signature of everything he did. What changed him was an idea he encountered in the late 1870s, not an idea he invented, but one he recognized the potential of with an acuity that none of its earlier practitioners had quite managed. The idea was the fixed price counter. Certain dry goods stores had been experimenting with the practice of placing slow-moving merchandise on a special table and pricing everything on that table at a single low price, usually a nickel, as a way of moving inventory that was sitting and costing money. The 5-cent table was not Woolworth's invention, but what Woolworth understood, and what others had not yet fully grasped, was that the fixed low price was not a clearance mechanism. It was a business model. It was the whole business. The reasoning was precise and counterintuitive in the way that genuinely good retail ideas tend to be. If you sold a large volume of low-priced goods with very thin margins, you could still generate significant profit, as long as the volume was high enough. And the volume could be high enough if the price was low enough to eliminate hesitation. What the 5-cent table did to customers was something no merchant had quite articulated before Woolworth. It removed the decision. When everything is a nickel, you do not calculate. You pick it up, you put it in your basket, you put it back, pick up the next thing and put that in the basket too. The individual purchase is so small that the normal apparatus of financial decision-making simply does not engage, and that changes everything about the shopping experience and everything about what a customer is willing to do in a store. Woolworth borrowed $300, which was a significant sum for a man in his position, and a considerable act of faith in his own idea, and opened his first store in Utica, New York in February of 1879. He called it a great 5-cent store. The store failed within months. Utica's downtown foot traffic was not what Woolworth had estimated, the location was wrong, and the initial inventory choices were uneven, in ways that became obvious in retrospect. He closed the Utica store and immediately began planning the next one. This is the detail that matters about Woolworth in those early years. He failed, and he took notes. He did not retreat into discouragement, or not for long. He analysed what had gone wrong with the same careful attention he brought to everything, identified the location problem, identified the inventory problem, and moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he opened a second store in June of 1879. This one also expanded the price range slightly, adding a 10-cent price point to complement the 5-cent one, which is where the phrase 5 and dime was born, from the dual price structure that Woolworth had arrived at through necessity and that would define the format for the next century. The Lancaster store worked. It worked immediately and decisively in a way that made everything previously uncertain suddenly clear. Customers came in, and they stayed and they bought. The low fixed prices did exactly what Woolworth had theorized they would do. They created a kind of frictionless shopping experience that customers had never encountered in quite this form. The average dry goods or general merchandise store of the period was a place of negotiation, of asking the price and being told the price and deciding whether that price was acceptable. At Woolworth's store, there was nothing to negotiate. The price was on the item, the price was the same as every other item at that price point, and the only question was whether you wanted it, not whether you could afford it, because at a nickel or a dime you could always afford it, or near enough. By the mid-1880s, Woolworth had opened enough stores to understand that he was building something with a structure to it, a replicable model that could work in town after town if the conditions were right, meaning high foot traffic, affordable rent, and a population of working people who spent their days in proximity to the store and their discretionary money in small, frequent amounts rather than large, infrequent ones. He was targeting the working class and lower middle class with deliberate precision, not because they were the only customers, but because they were the customers the retail system of the time was not serving well. Department stores catered to those with more means. General stores in smaller towns often operated on credit arrangements that made everything more expensive in the aggregate. The 5 and dime offered something neither of those provided. Decent merchandise at a fixed low price, available to anyone, judgment-free. The expansion of Woolworth's empire through the 1880s and 90s was not smooth or simple, but it was relentless. He opened stores across the Northeast, brought in his brother Charles as a partner, began forming associations with other 5 and dime operators, and developed the management practices that would eventually make centralized control of a large chain possible. He was particular about store interiors. He wanted his stores to feel bright and welcoming and organized, not chaotic or cluttered, and he invested in fixtures and lighting in a way that was not common for businesses targeting his price points. The stores should look, he believed, like places where a woman would enjoy spending time, not just places where she could find a cheap button. The experience of being in the store was part of the product. He was also particular about the buying. The fixed price model meant that every item in the store had to be purchasable at a cost that allowed a profit margin at 5 or 10 cents, which required an entirely different approach to sourcing than conventional retail. Woolworth became one of the first American retailers to buy in truly enormous quantities directly from manufacturers, cutting out the middlemen who would have made his price points impossible, and he became one of the first American retailers to work directly with manufacturers in Germany and England and eventually Japan to produce goods specifically designed to hit his price targets. The five and dime was not just a new kind of store, it was a new kind of supply chain, a new relationship between retailer and manufacturer, built on the premise that volume was the variable that made the otherwise impossible possible. By 1900, the Woolworth operation included dozens of stores across the United States, and the format was being replicated by competitors who had watched his success and concluded that there was room for more than one five and dime company in a country this large. S. H. Chris, S. S. Krizgi, J. J. Newberry, McCrory, W. T. Grant. Each of them built their own version of the format with their own particular inflections, their own geographic concentrations, their own approaches to merchandise mix and store design, but they were all working from the grammar that Woolworth had established. The five and dime was no longer one man's idea, it was an American institution. What Woolworth built in the early decades of the 20th century was something that had not existed before in quite this form, a retail category that operated as a consistent, reliable, geographically distributed commons for working American women. The five and dime was where you could go every week, in almost any town with a main street, and find the same categories of merchandise at the same price points, priced below the threshold of decision-making anxiety, arranged in a way that rewarded knowing the store and punished nobody for not having much to spend. It was democratic in a particular and meaningful way, not perfectly democratic, not without its exclusions and its complications, but democratic in the sense that a woman with $1.50 could shop with the same dignity and the same access to merchandise as a woman with $5. The price point was the leveler. Woolworth himself became fabulously wealthy enough to commission the construction of the Woolworth Building in Lower Manhattan, which opened in 1913 and was for a time the tallest building in the world, a tower of neo-Gothic terracotta and limestone that rose over 700 feet above Broadway and was nicknamed the Cathedral of Commerce, with a mixture of reverence and irony that Woolworth found genuinely pleasing. He had paid for the entire building in cash, $13 million, which was the kind of statement a man makes when he has spent 30 years being told that selling things for a nickel was not a serious business. He died in 1919, before the decade that would see his stores become as central to American life as the post office and the parish church, before the lunch counters and the cosmetics aisles and the Saturday morning regulars who would carry his model forward for another 60 years. What he left behind was more than a chain of stores. He left a form, a way of organising retail space and merchandise and pricing, and customer expectation that would define what the words five and dime meant to multiple generations of Americans. His stores taught people how to shop for themselves, at low price points, without assistance or social pressure, in a space designed to be browsed rather than navigated, enjoyed rather than endured. That was the gift. That was the lasting thing. By the time the 1960s arrived, the Woolworth Company was operating more than 3,000 stores across the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Germany and Australia, and the lunch counter had become the store within the store that gave the five and dime its particular warmth. The lunch counter was where the shopping paused, where the morning regulars had their coffee, where children were rewarded with a scoop of ice cream after the school supplies were purchased, where a working woman on her lunch break could get a hot meal for 60 cents and feel, for 25 minutes, completely at rest. And behind every lunch counter, in every city, in every iteration of the five and dime that lined the main streets of mid-century America, there was a woman in a uniform doing a job that looked simple from the outside and was, in practice, something else entirely. The building of a retail empire requires, at some level, a theory of the customer, a set of beliefs about who the customer is and what she wants, and what she will do when she enters your store. Most merchants of the late 19th century operated from a theory of the customer that was transactional at its core. The customer needs something, you have it, she pays a fair price, everyone leaves satisfied. Woolworth operated from something more sophisticated, even if he could not have articulated it in the language of retail theory because retail theory as a discipline did not yet exist. His theory was that the customer wanted to shop, not just to acquire, not just to need and purchase and leave, but to browse, to consider, to pick things up and put them down, to discover what she wanted in the act of looking at what was available. He believed that if you arranged your merchandise to reward that kind of browsing, and if you priced it below the threshold at which the internal conversation about whether to buy engaged, you would get a customer who stayed longer, touched more merchandise, made more purchases, and left feeling not depleted but satisfied. This was not conventional retail wisdom in the 1880s. It was genuinely new. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Oh, and if you'd rather just listen, we're on Spotify too, link in the description. Part of what made it work was the nature of the merchandise itself. Woolworth's early stores sold items that people genuinely used and used up. Notions, pins, needles, thread, buttons, small paper goods, hair accessories, kitchen items, things that had to be replenished on a regular basis, and that most women had on some form of mental running list all the time. By selling these items at 5 or 10 cents and keeping them well stocked, Woolworth ensured that a woman coming into his store almost always found something she actually needed, which meant her first purchases were need-based, and her additional purchases, the ones the browsable layout was designed to encourage, felt like additions to a practical errand rather than impulse spending. She came in for thread. She left with thread and a packet of pins and a new hair comb and a small tin of cold cream that she'd been meaning to try. The thread justified the trip. The rest was the 5 and dime working. Woolworth's relationship with his suppliers was one of the defining features of his operation, and one of the things that distinguished his success from his competitors' struggles. He understood very early that the fixed low-price model worked only if the cost of goods could be held correspondingly low, and that the only way to hold costs low at scale was to buy in enormous quantities and to go as directly as possible to the people who made the things. He developed relationships with manufacturers in Germany, which was in the late 19th century a leading producer of the kinds of small household goods and notions and decorative items that filled his shelves, and he travelled to Europe personally multiple times to negotiate these relationships and inspect the merchandise. He brought back goods that American stores of the time could not obtain as cheaply through conventional channels, and he passed the savings directly to his customers in the form of the 5 and 10 cent price points that defined his brand. The German connection was so significant to the early Woolworth operation that World War I, which cut off trade with Germany almost entirely, constituted a genuine crisis for the company. The sources that had supplied the delicate ornaments and the decorative items and the small specialty goods that Woolworth had built into his holiday merchandise strategy were suddenly unavailable, and replacement sources had to be found quickly. He found them in Japan and in domestic American manufacturers who were willing to tool up for the volume Woolworth could guarantee. This flexibility, this ability to pivot the supply chain when the existing supply chain failed, was another of Woolworth's commercial gifts, and it set the template for how the company would handle supply disruptions for the next half-century. The expansion model that Woolworth developed for opening new stores was also distinctive, and became the template that his competitors and eventually the entire chain retail industry would follow. Rather than licensing the concept or franchising it in the modern sense, Woolworth retained direct corporate control over all of his stores, hired managers and staff directly, sourced merchandise centrally, and maintained strict standards for store layout and presentation across all locations. This centralized model required a management infrastructure that was itself innovative for its time, systems for inventory control and personnel management and merchandise distribution that had not existed in retail before the chain store concept required them to be invented. He also understood the importance of location with an instinct that bordered on the obsessive. Woolworth did not simply look for empty retail space. He looked for a specific kind of empty retail space, on a specific kind of street, in a specific relationship to foot traffic and public transportation, and the other stores that would draw the kind of customer he was trying to reach. He walked the streets of potential locations himself, counted pedestrians, observed who was shopping at neighbouring stores and what they were buying, calculated the cost of rent against the volume of traffic, and concluded either that a location would work or that it would not. His failure in Utica was partly a failure of location analysis, and it was a failure he studied carefully and never repeated in quite the same way. The layout of a Woolworth store was standardized in ways that went beyond simple efficiency. The store was designed as an experience, not just a space. The wide, well-lit aisles allowed for comfortable browsing. The merchandise was arranged by category and subcategory in ways that rewarded knowing the store. The candy counter at the front was a deliberate welcome, a sensory invitation that reached customers before they had fully committed to the shopping experience. The lunch counter at the back or side was a destination within a destination, a place that could hold a customer in the store for an additional half hour beyond her shopping, and that made the store feel like something more than a retail space. It felt like a place to be. That distinction, the difference between a place where you bought things and a place where you wanted to be, was what Woolworth was building toward with every decision about layout and lighting and merchandise and pricing. He was building a commons. He just called it a store. The Woolworth building, the Cathedral of Commerce that opened in 1913 at the corner of Broadway and Park Place in Lower Manhattan, tells you something important about what Woolworth believed he had built. He did not build an ordinary office tower. He commissioned Cass Gilbert, one of the era's most significant architects, to design something that would be an architectural statement, something that would announce the legitimacy and permanence and cultural weight of what the Five and Dime had become. The neo-Gothic detailing, the spire, the lobby with its vaulted ceilings and Byzantine mosaics, the gargoyles at the upper stories, were not the choices of a man who thought he had built a convenience store. They were the choices of a man who believed, with some reason, that he had changed the way Americans thought about shopping and about their own ability to participate in the commercial life of the country. The building was controversial in the way that large, confident acts tend to be controversial. The Cathedral of Commerce nickname was used admiringly by some and ironically by others. To the admirers, it was a genuine statement. Commerce was not a lesser human activity than religion or government or art, and a building that honoured commerce was not overreaching. To the ironists, the Gothic detailing on a retail magnate's office tower was a bit much, the architectural equivalent of a man in a business suit with a cape. Woolworth himself, it seems, was unbothered by either reading. He had paid for the building in cash, and he liked it. He moved his executive offices to the upper floors and spent his remaining years looking out over Lower Manhattan from the highest occupied point in the city, which is the kind of view that a man who grew up on a farm in Jefferson County, New York, probably found deeply satisfying. What he did not live to see was the full elaboration of what he'd created. He died in 1919 before the 1920s brought the automobile and the expansion of the American middle class that would fuel his store's next phase of growth. He did not see the post-war years when the Five and Dime became the center of American Main Street culture, in a way that even his most optimistic projections might not have anticipated. He did not see the lunch counters become the warm social heart of neighborhoods across the country, or the sit-in movement that would be conducted at his store's counters by people demanding access to the welcome that his founding philosophy had always claimed to offer. He also did not see the end, which came slowly and then all at once in the last decades of the 20th century, as the suburban sprawl that his own success had partly enabled, by making consumer culture so accessible and so pleasurable to so many people, eventually created the conditions for a new kind of retail that outcompeted his model. The discount store and the big box retailer took what Woolworth had proven, that Americans would drive to stores that offered a genuine price advantage and scaled it to a size and a merchandise breadth that the Five and Dime could not match. The stores that replaced his stores were larger, cheaper, more convenient, and less warm. They sold more things for less money, and they did not have lunch counters or candy bins or cosmetics walls where a woman could spend 20 minutes considering a coral lipstick at 29 cents, and that turned out to matter more than the economics suggested it should. What Woolworth built was not primarily a retail concept, though the retail concept was real and significant. What he built was a relationship between a store and its customers, a relationship based on the belief that ordinary people deserved a store that treated them as welcome, that priced for their actual budgets rather than for their aspirations, that made the ordinary shopping errand into something that had pleasure in it. That relationship lasted for nearly a century in various forms and iterations, and it sustained itself through the loyalty of the women who shopped those stores and the women who worked in them. both of whom understood that the warm feeling the 5 and dime generated was not accidental, it was designed, and the people who maintained it every day were the ones who made it real. The competitors who arose alongside Woolworth in the decades following his Lancaster success form their own story within the larger story of the 5 and dime, and they illuminate the original model by showing how different people interpreted the same idea and what those interpretations produced. Sebastian Sparing Kresge was a Pennsylvania-born merchant who studied the Woolworth model closely and opened his first store in Memphis in 1897, the year Woolworth had already expanded to nearly 24 locations. Kresge was more conservative than Woolworth in some respects, more systematic in others, and the company he built differed from Woolworth's in ways that mattered to the women who worked at and shopped in each chain, even if those differences were not always visible in the merchandise itself. Where Woolworth invested heavily in store architecture and interior design, Kresge was more pragmatic, more focused on the commercial fundamentals of merchandise turnover and cost control. Where Woolworth expanded internationally and built the Cathedral of Commerce as a statement of intent, Kresge built solidly and carefully within his reach, and did not overextend. The result was a company that was less culturally visible than Woolworth's, but operationally sound in a way that would enable Kresge to make a decision in the 1960s that changed American retail more profoundly than almost anything Woolworth himself had done. The conversion of his 5 and dime stores into Kmart discount stores, completed through the early 1960s, and ultimately the template for the discount retail format that would come to define American shopping in the final decades of the century. The other dime store companies each developed their own regional identities and their own approaches to the format. S.H. Kress built stores with a level of architectural ambition that was unusual even for the 5 and dime chains, commissioning Beaux-Arts and neoclassical buildings in many of his southern and mid-Atlantic locations that were significantly grander than the surrounding commercial architecture. Kress believed that his stores should look like they belonged in the downtown shopping district, that they should carry the visual weight of the other buildings on the street, and the surviving Kress buildings in various American cities, some of them now registered historic places, are still impressive evidence that the 5 and dime was, in the hands of someone willing to invest in the built environment, capable of producing genuine commercial architecture. J. Newbury focused on the New England and Mid-Atlantic markets and developed a reputation for particularly well-organized stores with a merchandise mix that leaned toward housewares and domestic goods. W.T. Grant, operating primarily from New England, expanded southward and developed an approach to the format that was slightly upscale of the pure dime store model, pricing some merchandise above the traditional 5 and 10 cent ceiling and aiming at a customer base that was somewhat further up the economic ladder than Woolworth's core demographic. These differences mattered to the shopping women of the era in practical ways. The Woolworth customer and the Kresge customer were often shopping different stores for reasons that went beyond simple geography. The store she preferred was the store that felt right to her, that had the merchandise she wanted at the prices she expected in an environment that felt appropriate to her particular version of the Saturday morning shopping ritual. Some women were Woolworth loyalists who would walk an extra block rather than shop at Kresge. Others had their hierarchy differently arranged. The 5 and dime loyalty was real and was maintained without much conscious examination, the way the loyalty to a particular brand of thread or a particular style of bobby pin was maintained, through long practice and the accumulated weight of satisfactory experience. What all of the 5 and dime companies shared, regardless of their individual approaches to architecture and merchandise and expansion strategy, was the fundamental model that Woolworth had proven, that working-class women would shop regularly and loyally at a store that treated them as welcome, that priced its merchandise at levels below the friction threshold, that kept its stock consistent and its layout stable, and that provided a space where the shopping could be done with dignity and without pretension. This was the operating consensus of the 5 and dime industry, and it held through the post-war decades with remarkable consistency, even as the broader retail landscape around it changed substantially. The post-war years brought particular pressure to maintain the 5 and dime's price points, because the post-war years brought inflation that made the original nickel and dime ceiling increasingly difficult to honour. By the late 1940s, the industry had largely abandoned the fiction of the 5 and 10 cent universal price and had moved to a variable pricing model that went up to $1 and beyond in many merchandise categories, while maintaining the low price point identity through aggressive buying and the continued use of specific price points a nickel for certain candy items, a dime for basic notions, a quarter for merchandise that had previously been more expensive, as anchoring signals that told the customer this was still the kind of store that was on her side financially. The 5 and dime had become something slightly different from the original model, while retaining enough of the original model to maintain the identity. This is the kind of institutional evolution that does not always succeed, but in the case of the 5 and dime chains it did, for several more decades, because the core relationship between the store and its customers was strong enough to survive the price changes. The holiday business was particularly crucial to the 5 and dime's profitability in the post-war years, and Christmas was the fulcrum on which the whole retail year turned. The Christmas merchandise that appeared in October, the ornaments and the tinsel and the lights and the wrapping paper, and the small decorative items that filled the seasonal tables in the centre of the store, generated a proportion of annual revenue that the chains tracked with considerable attention, and that the buying departments planned for months in advance. The transition of Christmas from a primarily religious and family occasion to a consumer occasion was well underway by the 1950s, driven by exactly the forces the 5 and dime was positioned to serve: the aspiration to create a certain kind of holiday at home, the need for affordable merchandise to do it with, and the accessibility of a Main Street store that had the items in stock and the price points within reach. The Christmas ornament department at Woolworth in December was a specific experience that many people who grew up in mid-century America remember with a precision that suggests the experience imprinted itself on memory in a way that more ordinary shopping experiences did not. The ornaments in those years were often glass, imported from Germany or Czechoslovakia, or later from Japan, delicate and colourful, and hung from their hooks in a way that created a display of colour and reflected light under the store's fluorescent fixtures that was genuinely beautiful by the standards of any retail environment. They cost very little, 5 cents for a small ball, 10 cents for a larger one, and this meant that a family building its Christmas tree ornament collection 1 or 2 at a time over multiple years, as many families did, could produce something that looked genuinely festive without a significant outlay in any single year. The accumulation model of the 5 and dime Christmas, a few ornaments this year, a few more the next year, a set of lights the year after, the collection growing with the children and the years in a way that was both affordable and emotionally meaningful. This is the texture of what the 5 and dime was in American life. Not just a place to buy practical items, but a place that was woven into the rhythms of the year and the milestones of the decades, that was there for the Christmas ornaments and the Halloween candy and the Valentine's Day cards and the back-to-school composition books and the summer stationery and the Easter baskets that came in pastel colours at Easter time from the seasonal display in the centre of the floor. The 5 and dime was where the small ceremonies of mid-century American domestic life were equipped, and the women who ran it and the women who shopped it were both, in their different ways, maintaining that particular form of American ordinary life from inside it. The lunch counter story does not belong only to Woolworth. It belongs to all the 5 and dimes, and it belongs in particular to the years after World War II, when the lunch counter became something that exceeded its commercial purpose and became a kind of cultural node, a daily gathering point for people who were in the middle of their day and needed somewhere simple and affordable to land. In the post-war years, the 5 and dime lunch counter served a population that was increasingly mobile, increasingly suburban, increasingly likely to be in a downtown shopping district on a Tuesday afternoon for reasons that took them out of the house and left them hungry at an inconvenient hour. The menu was not complicated. It was not supposed to be. Hot dogs and hamburgers and grilled cheese sandwiches, soup from a steam table, often tomato, often chicken noodle, always available by the cup or by the bowl. Pie, usually cherry or apple, served in thick slices at room temperature or slightly warmer. Coffee in thick ceramic mugs that stayed warm through the conversation, because the mugs were heavy enough to hold the heat. Chocolate sodas and cokes and root beer floats and cherry cokes with the syrup added from a pump at the counter. Ice cream in scoops or in sundaes with the hot fudge ladled on at the counter by someone who had ladled a lot of hot fudge and knew exactly how much was correct. The prices were integral to the whole experience in a way that went beyond simple economics. A grilled cheese was 25 cents, 30 cents with a cup of soup. A cherry coke was a dime. A slice of pie was 15 cents. These prices meant that the lunch counter was available to almost everyone who walked into the store, not as a treat reserved for a certain budget level, but as a genuine option that did not require calculation. You could have a real midday meal for under 50 cents, and the meal would be hot and the counter would be clean, and the sales girl behind it would refill your coffee without being asked, because that was the job and she was good at it. The lunch counter ran on a particular human infrastructure. The counter girl, who was not a girl in the sense of age or fragility, but a girl in the particular 1950s and 60s workplace vocabulary that applied the word to any woman in a service position regardless of her actual years. She was the centre of the operation in a way that the menu and the prices and the fixtures were not. The lunch counter lived or died on the quality of the person behind it, on her speed, her memory, her capacity for the particular social performance that the job required every single minute of every single shift. And that job, as it turned out, was considerably more demanding than it looked. It looked easy because she made it look easy. That was in fact most of the job. You come to understand something about the gap between appearance and reality when you consider that the era's most beloved retail institution, the gleaming chrome lunch counter of the American 5 and dime, was staffed almost entirely by women doing physically demanding, socially skilled, economically undervalued work with such practiced competence that generations of customers sat at those counters and never once wondered how hard it actually was. The history of American domestic labour is full of that particular invisibility, and the 5 and dime lunch counter is one of its most precise illustrations. But the lunch counter had another dimension in the 1960s, one that goes beyond labour history and into the moral history of the country, and it is a dimension that cannot be passed over in any honest accounting of what those counters meant and what they cost. The 5 and dime lunch counters of the South were segregated. They served white customers and refused service to black customers, not everywhere and not always with the same degree of enforcement, but with enough consistency and institutional backing that challenging the practice required a kind of courage that sits in an entirely different category from the ordinary demands of the shopping day. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college students sat down at the Woolworth lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and ordered coffee. They were refused service. They remained seated. The next day, more students came. The day after that, more. Within weeks, sit-ins were happening at 5 and dime lunch counters across the South. Young men and women sitting quietly at chrome and formica counters in their best clothes, asking for service, being refused, being subjected to verbal harassment and in some cases physical violence, and remaining seated. They remained seated because the act of sitting at a lunch counter was a moral argument delivered in the language the 5 and dime had always spoken, the language of access, of the right to be in the store, of the democratic promise that the price point was the only threshold that should matter. The lunch counter where everyone was welcome, the lunch counter where you could sit for 25 minutes on a 50-cent meal and feel, for that duration, completely at rest. The Greensboro protesters understood exactly what they were sitting at. They understood it, in many cases, because they had watched their white neighbours sit at those counters all their lives. They understood the language of the 5 and dime. They were speaking it back. By July of 1960, the Greensboro Woolworths lunch counter was desegregated. By the early years of the decade, the lunch counters across the South were following, some quickly, some slowly, some only after further pressure and further legislation. The counters that had been designed as a gathering place for everyone were, finally, open to everyone. The ideal that the 5 and dime had always claimed for itself, the democratic price, the open door, the no-judgment access to a seat and a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, was being made real by people who had never had the luxury of taking it for granted. That story is part of what the 5 and dime was. It is not a footnote to the chrome and the candy and the lipstick displays. It is woven through the whole thing. The lunch counter that felt like the heart of the store was also, for a generation of Americans, the site where the country's unfinished argument with itself came most sharply into focus. And the women who stood behind those counters, white and black both, were working inside a space that carried more weight than any of the promotional materials had ever suggested. You are standing at the 5 and dime lunch counter at 7:45 in the morning on a Thursday in September, and the store has not officially opened yet, but your shift has. You've been here since 7:15, which is the time required to do everything that needs doing before the first customer sits down at 8 o'clock, and there is more that needs doing than a person looking at a lunch counter from the customer side would ever estimate. The counter has been wiped, but wiping is not enough. You go over it again with the damp cloth, following the grain of the formica in long, even strokes, then dry it with the clean cloth from under the counter, then inspect it in the light from the overhead fixture for any streaks or missed spots that will show up once customers are sitting and looking down at their coffee cups. The stools have been cleaned, and the chrome on the counter rail has been polished, because the chrome is what people see first, and the chrome reflects everything, including the quality of the operation. The napkin holders have been filled, the sugar dispensers have been checked and refilled where needed, the coffee urns have been started and are brewing, and the smell of it is moving through the back of the store in a way that you no longer notice consciously, but that every customer will notice the moment they walk through the door. Your uniform is a shirtwaist dress in pale blue cotton, with a white apron tied at the waist, and by the end of a full shift it will tell the story of your day in a way that no timesheet could. Grease near the pocket where you wipe your hands between orders. A splash of something near the hem that happened when a soda was poured too fast. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Oh, and if you'd rather just listen, we're on Spotify too, link in the description. Coffee on the sleeve from reaching past a customer to grab a mug from the rack. Right now it is clean and pressed, and you check it in the small mirror over the hand washing sink and straighten your apron and decide that it will do. The steam table is warming up. Today's soups are tomato and beef vegetable, as they are most Thursdays, because the menu at a 5 and dime lunch counter does not change much from week to week, which is a feature, not a limitation. The customers who come in every Thursday for tomato soup are coming in because they want tomato soup, not because they want to be surprised. The regulars have regulars orders, and knowing those orders without being told is part of what you do, and part of what makes the difference between a counter that customers come back to and one they visit once. You have been working this counter for 3 years, which means you know every regular who comes in between 8 o'clock and the lunch rush, and you know their orders, and you know whether they want to talk or want to be left to their coffee, and you know which ones will sit down looking like the day has already gotten the better of them, and need the coffee poured immediately and the menu not pushed. You know the older woman who comes in every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:30 and orders a cup of tea and a slice of whatever pie is on offer, and stays for exactly 40 minutes. You know she uses 2 sugars, and that she wants the tea bag left on the side so she can add it back if the tea gets cold. You know her name, which is Margaret, and she knows yours, and when she leaves she always says thank you very much, and you always say see you Tuesday, and you both understand that this small exchange is a form of genuine warmth. At 8 o'clock the store opens and the first customers of the morning begin moving through. Most of them are not coming to the lunch counter yet, not at 8, because 8 is for shopping, for notions and stationery and cosmetics before the stores get busy, for people who have learned through long practice that early morning shopping means short lines at the register and fully stocked shelves. But a few come straight to the counter. The men who have stopped in on their way to work, usually just for coffee, which you pour and have waiting by the time they have their coats off. The older women who prefer to start their shopping day with something warm and a few minutes off their feet. A mother with a young child who needs a few minutes of stillness before the day's errands begin, and who will order milk for the child and a coffee for herself, and sometimes a piece of toast that she will split between them. You take orders and pour coffee and move between the counter and the steam table, and the ice cream case and the soda dispensers with a physical efficiency that has been developed over 3 years until it functions almost below the level of conscious thought. You know how long it takes to grill a cheese sandwich, and you start it at the right moment so it comes off the grill exactly when the customer is ready for it. You know how to carry 3 cups in one hand without spilling, because you learned that in the first month, and it has saved you countless trips. You know how to write a check in the abbreviated notation that lets you reconstruct any order at any point in the next 20 minutes without ambiguity, and you know how to add a column of figures in your head because the register is at the other end of the counter, and checking between every transaction would cost you time you cannot afford during a rush. The morning moves in a rhythm. Slow at first, a few customers, manageable, space to breathe. Then building, around 10 o'clock, when the shopping crowd has been in the store long enough to want to rest, and the counter starts to fill. By 10:30, on a good Thursday, most of the stools are occupied, and there are 2 or 3 people waiting, and this is where the job becomes something that requires a different kind of presence. You have to hold multiple things at once. Who ordered what? Who is waiting? What's on the grill? What needs refilling? Who has been waiting longer than is acceptable and needs acknowledgement? Who's trying to get your attention for the check and should not have to wait much longer? All of this happens simultaneously. None of it pauses while you deal with something else. The noise level rises with the crowd. This is part of the job that people who have not done it do not always understand: the noise. A busy lunch counter is not quiet. It is the sound of crockery and silverware and the hiss of the grill and the coffee urns and voices at varying volumes and the bell at the pickup window if your particular store has a kitchen pass-through, and the general ambient clatter of a public food service space operating at capacity. You work inside that sound for your entire shift, and you learn to filter it, to hear the sounds that require your action, and let the rest move through you without disrupting your focus. You're never rude, you're never dismissive, you're never short with a customer even when a customer is short with you, and some of them will be. Not many, but enough that after 3 years you have a mental catalogue of difficult customer types and the specific responses that work best for each of them. The man who sends his coffee back because it is not hot enough, even though you poured it 30 seconds ago, and the urns are set at the correct temperature. You pour him a fresh cup from the other urn without comment and move on. The woman who cannot decide between the tomato soup and the beef vegetable and asks you which you would get, and then orders the one you did not mention. You do not take it personally because you understood from the beginning that she was not actually asking for your recommendation. She was asking to be heard while she made up her own mind, which is a different thing. The child who knocks his chocolate milk off the counter onto the floor and begins to cry. You clean up the milk, you pour another, you do not charge for it, and the mother looks at you with a gratitude that is out of proportion to the action, but not out of proportion to the fact that she has been holding things together all morning, and this small kindness has reached her at exactly the right moment. The lunch rush begins properly at 11:30 and runs until around 1 o'clock, and during those 90 minutes the counter operates at a level that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not worked it. Every stool is occupied. There is a line. There are people who want to eat and get back to work by noon, and who are calculating the minutes with the quiet intensity of people who have a deadline. You move at a pace that you maintain without letting it show, because a counter girl who looks frantic communicates urgency to her customers, and urgency is not what they paid 25 cents for. The pace is fast. The appearance is unhurried. That gap is professional skill in its purest form. You grill sandwiches and pour soup and scoop ice cream and make sodas and refill coffee and take checks and make change and wipe the counter between customers and call orders to the kitchen when there is a kitchen and manage the line with a fairness that is both real and visible, because the people waiting need to see that the person in front of them was before them honestly, and that when their turn comes it will be honoured. You do not play favourites at a lunch counter, not openly. You might pour Margaret's tea a little faster than a stranger's coffee, because Margaret comes twice a week and the stranger is here once, but you do it in a way that does not announce itself. By 2 o'clock the rush has passed and the counter is emptied to its afternoon pace. The after-shopping crowd, the women resting before the bus home, the teenagers who come in for sodas and stay for an hour, the occasional man having a late lunch because his morning ran long. The afternoon has a different quality than the morning. It is quieter and looser, and you have room to breathe and sometimes to stop for a moment at the end of the counter and drink your own cup of coffee, which you do not have time for during the rush and which tastes at 2 in the afternoon like the best thing you have had all day. Your feet hurt. They have been hurting since 11 o'clock, not sharply, not catastrophically, but with the steady, reliable persistence of feet that have been on hard floors for hours and are not going to let you forget it. The shoes you wear are low-heeled and sensible, chosen specifically for this job after the first pair you tried gave you blisters in the first week, and even these, after a full shift, press against your soles in ways that will leave marks. You do not sit. Sitting at the counter during your shift is not done. You stand, you move, you lean against the counter when the traffic allows, and you rest your weight on one foot and then the other, and you think about dinner, and whether there is anything worth watching on television tonight, and whether your sister called while you were at work. At 5 o'clock your replacement comes in, and you do the handoff, which means going over what is in the steam table, what pie is left, what supplies need restocking, anything unusual that happened during the day that she should know about. She is younger than you by 6 years and has been on this counter for 8 months, and she is good, genuinely good, with the right instincts for the work and the patience for the difficult moments. You tell her it was a normal Thursday. She nods, she ties her apron, you untie yours. You have been on your feet for 9 hours with 45 minutes for your own lunch. which you ate at the employee table in the back, not at the counter. You have served somewhere between 80 and 100 customers. You have poured more coffee than you will ever be able to count. You have grilled perhaps 40 sandwiches and filled a dozen soup orders and made 15 or 20 sodas and cleaned the counter 4 times and refilled every supply station twice. You have been pleasant throughout, not performed pleasant in a way that required conscious effort, but genuinely pleasant in the way that comes from liking the work and liking the people, and feeling some reasonable satisfaction in doing the job well. You collect your things from the employee room. You check your hair in the small mirror, which is a habit, not vanity, just the check you do before you go back out into the world. You push through the employee door and you're in the store again. The 5 and dime in its late afternoon state, lights still bright, merchandise still organised, a few last shoppers moving through the aisles on their way home. You pass the candy counter and the cosmetics and the notions, and you go out the front door into the early evening air. It is cooler now than it was this morning. You're glad of it. You walk toward the bus stop and the smell of the store, coffee and grease and something sweet, follows you for half a block before the evening air replaces it. You're tired in a way that is complete and clean, the tiredness of a day fully used. You think about sitting down. You think about putting your feet up. You think about tomorrow and the counter that will need wiping again at 7:15 and the coffee that will need starting, and Margaret who will come in at 9:30 for her tea, 2 sugars, bag on the side. You're not unhappy about any of it. The lunch counter has a geography that you know as intimately as you know the geography of your own kitchen, and the knowing took about a month to develop, and has deepened steadily in the 2 years and 11 months since. The counter itself is 12 stools wide, each stool fixed to the floor on a chrome post with a red vinyl seat that swivels and that has been swiveled approximately 10,000 times since the last time anyone replaced the vinyl, and the vinyl on 4 of the 12 stools is showing wear along the outer edge in a way that you have mentioned in the maintenance log twice, and that has not yet been addressed, which is something you file in the part of your mind that keeps running track of things that should be better and are not yet. The counter itself is Formica over wood, the speckled grey-white that Woolworth standardised in the post-war renovations, and it reflects the overhead light in a way that shows marks if the wiping is anything less than thorough. You wipe it thoroughly. You have always wiped it thoroughly. The counter looking right is not something you can shrug off because the counter looking right is part of what tells the customer, before she sits down, that this is a place where the standards are maintained and she will be served properly. Behind the counter is the workspace that you operate from for the entirety of your shift, and it is both smaller than a person looking from the outside might imagine, and more elaborately organised than a person looking from the outside could possibly appreciate. The coffee urns are to your left, 2 of them, one for regular and one for decaf, though the decaf urn is used much less frequently, and you check it more carefully at the start of each shift because coffee that sits is worse than coffee that is fresh, and the regular customers know the difference. Between the urns is the shelf of mugs, thick white ceramic, heavy enough to hold heat and durable enough to survive being set down on Formica at the pace of a busy lunch rush without chipping, though they do chip eventually and you rotate the chipped ones to the back of the shelf so they are used less often and pulled for a new order less readily. It is a small thing, but it matters. The ice cream case is to your right, chest height, with the sliding glass top that fogs when the kitchen is warm, which it is warm nearly always during the middle of the day. The case holds 6 flavours: vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, butter pecan, chocolate chip, and something the menu calls orange sherbet that occupies a small section at the end, and that most customers order for their children rather than for themselves. You can scoop ice cream one-handed while writing a check with the other hand, which is a skill you developed in your 2nd month because the morning of your 1st month was full of the kind of inefficiency that comes from doing 2 things sequentially that could be done simultaneously. You develop the skill by doing it, by trying it and dropping the scoop into the case and retrieving it and trying again, until the muscle memory was there and the simultaneous became automatic. The soda dispensers are mounted at counter height, the standard chrome fixtures with the flavour buttons that produce a controlled stream of syrup mixed with carbonated water, and they require a light touch that is not obvious until you have overpopped a dozen Cokes and understood through that specific mess exactly how light the touch needs to be. Cherry Coke requires a pump of syrup from the separate cherry dispenser before the Coke comes through, and the ratio matters, and the ratio is something you have worked out through experience and that you do not write down anywhere, because the experience of having worked it out is how you know it, and writing it down would not convey it accurately anyway. A chocolate soda requires the syrup first, then the carbonated water worked in slowly, then the ice cream dropped in last, then the long spoon inserted and tilted to encourage a specific amount of blending without deflating the whole thing, and the result should look like something worth ordering again, which is the test you apply to every soda before it goes across the counter. The griddle is in the kitchen pass-through, which in your store means there is a window between the counter and the small kitchen behind it, and the kitchen has a cook named Harold who's been frying eggs and grilling sandwiches since before you came to this store, and Harold and you have worked out a communication system that is efficient and almost completely silent, based on the system of check abbreviations you use and the implicit understanding you have developed over 3 years about what takes how long and what needs to be flagged when the timing is going to be off. You ring the bell at the pass-through when you have an order that is ready for pickup, and Harold responds in kind, and the interval between your ringing and his ringing is something you track with the background part of your attention at all times during the rush, so that you know where each order is in the sequence without having to ask, and without making the customer aware that you are tracking it. The pie is kept in the glass case at the end of the counter nearest the register, 2 or 3 varieties on any given day, in the thick slices that the 5 and dime lunch counter has always served, which are not dainty and are not architectural but are satisfying in the way that pie is always satisfying when the piece is a real piece and the filling is what it says it is. Today's pie is apple and cherry, and the apple is selling because it is September. An apple pie in September has a particular rightness to it that is partly the season, and partly the smell of it coming out of the case when the case is opened, which is a smell that works on people's decision-making in the same way the candy counter works on theirs, below the level of conscious choice, at the level of the body and the memory. You have sold 7 pieces of apple pie since 8 o'clock this morning, and it is not yet 11. The cherry is slower. It usually is. Your order pad is in the apron pocket on the right side, and the pencil is on the apron string loop, and the check system you use writes each item in an abbreviated form that you developed yourself over the first 6 months, and that encodes all the information you need to reconstruct the order accurately. The number of the stool, the item abbreviation, any modifications, the price. TC is tomato cup, TVB is tomato cup, and vegetable beef together when someone orders soup of the day, and both soups are included. GC is grilled cheese, GCT is grilled cheese with tomato. A circle means add something, and X means hold something. You add the column at the bottom and write the total and present it face down on the counter. Not because there is anything private about what people are spending at a 5 and dime lunch counter, but because the face down presentation is a small professional courtesy. The acknowledgement that the transaction is between you and the customer and not available for commentary from the stool beside them. The regulars know your system without knowing they know it, in the same way they know your name and the way you pour coffee, and the level of their refill at which you appear automatically without being signalled. Ruth, who comes in every weekday at 11:45 for the soup and a piece of toast, knows that her refill appears when the cup is at the 3/4 empty mark, not when it is almost empty, and certainly not before she has finished the first round. She has never told you this preference in words. She does not need to. You observed it in the first 2 weeks, and you have honoured it ever since. This is the knowledge that makes a good counter, not the knowledge of menu prices or the location of the ice cream scoops, but the knowledge of what each regular needs and the precision with which you deliver it, without making them aware you are thinking about it. The afternoon after a lunch rush has a quality that is unlike any other part of the shift. The noise drops, the stool's empty. Harold in the kitchen begins his after-rush cleanup, and the sound of the griddle scraper against the metal surface comes through the pass-through in a rhythmic, almost soothing way. You clean the counter more carefully now than you can during the rush, going over sections that were wiped quickly between orders and now need the thorough treatment. You refill the sugar dispensers and the napkin holders. You count the pie and write the remaining quantities on the check you keep for inventory. You check the coffee urns and decide whether they need a fresh pot or can be topped off, and you decide based on the time and the afternoon traffic you expect, which varies by day of the week and which you have learned over 3 years with enough accuracy that you almost never run short and almost never end the day with a full pot that has been sitting since 2 o'clock. There is a kind of pride in this, in the precise calibration of a working day, in the management of a small operation with enough competence that the operation runs without obvious seams, and the customers inside it feel taken care of in a way that reads as effortless. The pride is not a shouting kind of pride, it is a quiet kind of pride, the kind that you carry in the straightness of your counter and the fullness of your napkin holders and the way the coffee is always ready and always at the right temperature. Nobody gives you a review. Nobody from the management walks through and tells you that the counter looks good and the coffee is right and the regulars are being handled with the appropriate balance of attention and space. You know because you can see it, in the way the regulars settle when they sit down, in the way the coffee disappears to the right level before you have to think about refilling it, in the way Ruth finishes her soup and her toast and says "see you tomorrow" in the way she says it, when she's been properly fed and properly left alone and has had exactly what she came in for. You have thought sometimes about what you would do if the counter closed, if the store changed ownership or cut the food service, or reorganized in some way that eliminated the position you have held for 3 years. The thought does not produce the anxiety it would have produced when you started, when you were new to the work and less certain of your own competence. Now it produces something more like mild inconvenience. You could find another counter, in another five and dime or in a drugstore or in a diner, and you would be competent there within a month because the skills transfer. The coffee and the ice cream and the pie and the order pad and the rush management, these are portable. What does not fully transfer is the regulars. Margaret with her tea, Ruth with her soup, the mother who comes in on Wednesdays with her youngest child and orders the same thing every time and sits in the same seat and talks to you in the scattered, interrupted way of someone who has been alone with a 3-year-old all morning and needs 6 minutes of adult conversation more than she needs the grilled cheese she ordered. Those relationships are of this counter, and this location, and this particular configuration of regular faces that has built up over 3 years. They do not transfer. You would have to build them again somewhere new, and you would, because that is also a skill, the skill of learning people quickly and becoming reliable to them, but you would miss the specific ones you have here. There is a moment in the middle of the Wednesday lunch rush when the counter is full and the orders are stacking, and Harold is running slightly behind on the sandwiches, and the coffee at stool 7 is nearly empty, and the woman at stool 3 has been waiting 4 minutes for her check and she has a bus to catch, and you are moving through all of this with a calm that is not the absence of awareness, but the presence of a particular kind of competence that looks like calm from the outside. You have 4 things in motion simultaneously. You're carrying the coffee to stool 7 and noting that stool 3 has her check ready to be presented, and that stool 9 is about to want her refill too, and somewhere in the part of your awareness that tracks Harold, you know his timing is off, and the sandwich at stool 11 is going to be late, and you're already deciding how to address that before it becomes a problem the woman at stool 11 feels. The solution is simple, but it requires moving at the right moment. You present the woman at stool 3 her check first, which takes 30 seconds, and then you bring the coffee to stool 7, and as you set the coffee down you look towards stool 11 and you say just another moment, and she nods because your tone is not rushed or apologetic, but simply informational, and you mean it. And she hears that you mean it, and the problem does not become a problem. Harold rings the bell at the pass-through 40 seconds after that, and you bring the sandwich out and the woman at stool 11 has been waiting perhaps 6 minutes total, which on a busy Wednesday is not unusual, and she does not complain, partly because you told her it was coming, and partly because the sandwich, when it arrives, is the right sandwich and it looks right and smells right. None of this sequence was planned in advance. It happened in real time, built from the accumulated knowledge of 3 years at this counter, the understanding of where each person in the sequence was in their meal and their waiting and their patience, the understanding of Harold's rhythms and how to read the 2 or 3 minutes of lag that appears in his output when the kitchen volume spikes, the understanding that a brief acknowledgement to someone who is waiting costs 30 seconds and prevents 3 minutes of escalating frustration. The sequence happened because you know the counter, because you have made enough mistakes over 3 years to understand exactly which mistakes cost you later and which ones don't, and you have stopped making the ones that cost you. The skill of remembering orders is also not the simple mechanical feat it appears to be from the outside. It is not primarily a memory skill, it is a spatial skill, an organizational habit of mind that ties each order to its location, to the stool number and the customer's position in your service sequence, so that what you are remembering is not a disembodied list of items but a map of the counter with orders attached to each point on the map. Stool 7 is the man in the grey jacket who comes in every Wednesday. who ordered the grilled cheese and the tomato soup and the coffee, 2 sugars. Stool 3 is a woman you have not seen before, neatly dressed, who ordered the chicken salad plate and the iced tea and who has been here 40 minutes, which is how you know she has a bus to catch, because most people who have been at a lunch counter for 40 minutes and are now flagging you for the check have a bus to catch. The map updates continuously as customers arrive and leave, and as orders progress from waiting to delivered. This is not a parlour trick. It is a professional skill, developed and refined, and it is one of the skills that the job description does not name because it does not name any skills, because the job description does not think of what you do as skilled. The soda fountain work has its own choreography that is separate from the sandwich orders and the soup and the coffee, and is managed on a different timeline because sodas and sundaes are not made in the kitchen and do not depend on Harold's schedule. They depend on you entirely, on your speed and your memory of the sequence and your physical efficiency at the ice cream case and the soda dispensers. A chocolate soda ordered at stool 5 alongside a grilled cheese that is on the grill right now should be ready at approximately the same time as the grilled cheese, which means you start the soda when the grilled cheese is about halfway through its time on the grill. You know how long a grilled cheese takes because you have made this calculation 10,000 times, and it lives in your body now, not in your mind. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Oh, and if you'd rather just listen, we're on Spotify too, link in the description. You put the syrup in the glass, you work the carbonated water in slowly with the long handle of the spoon tilted to minimize the foam. You set the glass aside, you finish 2 other orders, you scoop the ice cream and add it to the soda, and carry it across to stool 5 at approximately the same moment that Harold rings the bell for the grilled cheese. You do not stop to notice this, you just do it. The lunch counter is also a social system, not just a commercial one, and part of your job is managing the social dynamics that arise when people eat in close proximity at a counter, where the seating is fixed and the strangers are sitting 18 inches apart. Most of the time, this is not a significant consideration. People who sit at a lunch counter are generally comfortable sitting at a lunch counter and understand the implicit rules. You face forward, you do not make extended eye contact with the person beside you unless you have established a conversational openness. You do not comment on what someone else is eating or ordering, you keep your elbows reasonable. But occasionally something arises that requires management. 2 regulars who have a history with each other, a history you have observed over months without ever being told what the history is, who will not sit at adjoining stools and who manage this by arriving at different times, but who have occasionally arrived at the same time and created a low-level awkward tension that you manage by finding the second arrival a seat at the far end of the counter with a naturalness that makes it seem like the far end of the counter is simply the better seat. A customer who is having a difficult day and whose difficulty is apparent in the way she sits and the way she holds her coffee and the way she is not quite managing to look at anything, who does not want to talk and does not need to be engaged, and for whom the best thing you can do is refill her coffee promptly and leave her alone and make the counter feel safe by being reliable and undemanding. A pair of older women who come in together on Fridays and who talk at a volume that the rest of the counter can follow if it wants to, and who are entirely pleasant and who add a certain energy to the room that is mostly positive, and whose stories, heard in fragments over months, have produced in you a fairly comprehensive understanding of their families, their health situations, their opinions of their daughters-in-law, and their long-standing disagreement about the correct way to make a proper pie crust. You are not a therapist. You're not a social worker. You're not even officially a person whose job includes managing the human atmosphere of the counter. But you are the person who is there, every day, at the centre of a space where people come to rest and eat, and occasionally to sit in the kind of public quiet that is different from private quiet, because it is shared with strangers and therefore less lonely. You are the person who makes the counter feel like a counter, and that making is not decorative, it is the whole thing. Let us take a moment with that, because what comes next belongs to the same world, even if it looks a little different from the outside. The official story of the Five and Dime is a warm one, and most of it is true. The low prices were real, the accessibility was real, the Saturday morning shopping ritual and the lunch counter coffee, and the clerk who knew your order were real. The Five and Dime genuinely did function as a kind of civic commons for mid-century American working-class life, in a way that few other institutions matched. It would be easy, and not entirely inaccurate to look back on those stores and feel only warmth. But the official story is not the whole story. The official image of the five and dime, the gleaming chrome counter, the smiling salesgirl, the fully stocked shelves at prices anyone could afford, was maintained by a set of conditions that the promotional materials and the nostalgic photographs never quite captured. Behind the democratic price point and the open door was a system of labour that cost the women inside it considerably more than it was willing to pay. The salesgirl and the countergirl were, for most of the five and dime's history, among the lowest paid workers in the American retail economy. This is not a hidden fact, not a scandal that had to be uncovered, but rather a structural condition that was simply accepted as the operating reality of the industry and rarely examined with any rigour in the popular image of the stores. The five and dime owed its entire existence to the fixed low price, and the fixed low price owed a significant portion of its sustainability to the fixed low wages of the women who staffed the stores. A salesgirl at Woolworths in 1960 earned between $35 and $50 per week, depending on her location and her tenure, and that range was not generous even by the standards of the time. The federal minimum wage in 1960 was $1 per hour, and many five and dime positions were priced at or just above the minimum, structured as full-time employment, with a schedule that made them difficult to supplement with other work. The lunch counter workers were additionally complicated by the practice of tipping, which existed in theory but was inconsistent in practice, and was never structured into the compensation in a way that made it reliable. A good lunch counter girl at a busy store in a prosperous neighbourhood might supplement her base wage meaningfully with tips on a busy Friday. A counter girl at a quieter store in a lower income district might make very little above her base. The management treated tips as bonus income, not as a structural component of the compensation, and adjusted base wages accordingly, which meant the system transferred risk from the employer to the worker in a way that benefited the company and disadvantaged the employee. The physical conditions of the work were also more demanding than the image suggested. The lunch counter girl stood for her entire shift, 9 or 10 hours, on floors that were hard and on feet that absorbed every hour of it. The heat near the grills was real heat, not ambient warmth, but the specific draining heat of close proximity to cooking equipment in a space that was not always well ventilated. The noise of a busy lunch counter was sustained and significant. The pace of the rush was something that required physical and mental effort that did not diminish with experience. It only became more manageable, which is a different thing from becoming less demanding. The salesgirls on the floor had their own specific burdens, chief among them the standing. Five and dime floor policy for most of the chain's history required salesgirls to remain on their feet at all times during the shift, not as a formal written rule in all cases, but as an understood professional expectation that was enforced through management presence and the knowledge that a girl who sat down when the manager was watching was a girl whose tenure at the store would not be long. Chairs behind counters were rare, stools were rarer. The idea that a salesgirl might need to rest her legs during a 9-hour shift was not, in the main, a consideration that the five and dime's operational model was designed to accommodate. The dress code was uniform and uncompensated. The pale blue dress, or the uniform apron, depending on the position, was a required element of the job that the company specified and the employee purchased, in many cases at a slight discount through the company, but purchased nonetheless. A new employee might spend 2 or 3 weeks of her wages on the wardrobe required to begin the job, which was a significant barrier for young women entering the workforce for the first time, and a recurring cost for all of them, since uniforms wore out under the conditions of daily use and had to be replaced. The social performance required of the five and dime salesgirl was also a form of invisible labour that received no explicit acknowledgement in her compensation. Pleasantness was not optional. Patience was not optional. The managed presentation of warmth toward every customer, regardless of how that customer behaved, was a professional standard enforced by management observation and by customer complaint, which was taken seriously and could affect a girl's standing, her schedule, or her continued employment. To be rude to a customer was to be a problem. To be short-tempered was to be a problem. To be anything other than pleasant, efficient, and seemingly untaxed by the work was to be, in the language of the period, not suitable for the position. The emotional labour was built into the job description without being named as labour at all. Women's retail work in mid-century America operated almost entirely on this understanding, that the pleasantness and the patience and the emotional management were simply part of being female, not skills that required cultivation or compensation, not a form of work that deserved recognition separate from the physical tasks of the position. The salesgirl was pleasant because women were pleasant. The countergirl was patient because women were patient. The idea that these were professional capacities that a woman had developed through experience and exercise, capacities that cost something and were worth compensating accordingly, was not part of the conversation. It was part of the invisible infrastructure that made the five and dime's warm, welcoming atmosphere possible at the price point at which it was offered. The race dimension of the five and dime's labour history runs alongside all of this. Black women who applied for salesgirl and counter positions at five and dime stores in the North and Midwest in the 1940s and 50s encountered significant resistance. Many stores did not hire black women in customer-facing roles, not as a matter of official written policy in most cases, but as an understood practice that was enforced informally through hiring decisions and never publicly acknowledged. The positions that were available to black women in five and dime stores were more often the backstage positions, the stockroom, the cleaning staff, the kitchen if the kitchen was not customer visible. The public face of the five and dime, the face that the promotional materials and the photographs showed, was overwhelmingly white. In the South, the racial structure of the five and dime was more explicit and more brutal, and it did not apply only to the workers. The lunch counters that served as the warm heart of the shopping experience, the counters where a woman could sit with her coffee and feel that the day was manageable, served only white customers in most southern stores until the sit-in movement of the early 1960s forced the issue into public view in a way it could not be ignored. The five and dime that held itself out as a store for everyone maintained in practice a system that explicitly excluded a portion of the everyone it claimed to serve. The Woolworth Company's response to the sit-in movement was complicated and does not reduce to either heroism or villainy. The company privately indicated sympathy with the protesters' position, while publicly maintaining that decisions about service were made at the local franchise level, a position that allowed the national company to avoid direct responsibility, while local managers were left to navigate the confrontation on the ground. When desegregation of the lunch counters happened, it happened store by store, city by city, under the sustained pressure of the sit-in movement, and then under the weight of federal civil rights legislation, not because the five and dime chains decided collectively that they had been wrong and needed to act. The reform was imposed from outside by people who demanded that the democratic ideal the five and dime had always claimed for itself be made real. There is something worth sitting with in that fact. The five and dime had always offered itself as a store for the common person, the working person, the person without the means for department store prices or the social ease required for boutique shopping. Its democratic price point was its founding principle and its ongoing identity, and it maintained in practice a segregation that directly contradicted that identity, not in a way that was obscured or difficult to see, but in full public view at the most public part of the store, the lunch counter, where the contradiction was impossible to miss if you were the person being excluded from it. The women who worked those counters, on both sides of the racial line, were doing work that was more complicated than it appeared. The white counter girl who served white customers and was not personally responsible for the policies she worked under, but worked under them nonetheless and benefited from them in the limited sense that her employment was not contested in the way that employment for black women in the same stores was contested. The black women who sat at those counters in the early 1960s were also working, doing a different kind of work, the work of insisting on their right to be in the public space that the five and dime had built, and that the five and dime's own stated values required to be open to all. None of this is to say that the five and dime was simply a vehicle for exploitation and exclusion, because it was not simply that. It was genuinely something else as well, something that created real access and real pleasure and real community for enormous numbers of people. The bobby pins and the lipstick and the lunch counter pie and the Saturday morning shopping ritual were real experiences with real value. The women who built their weekly routines around the five and dime were not being fooled. They were getting something genuine. The question that the institution's actual history asks us to hold, alongside that genuine something, is, for whom and at what cost, and who was being excluded from the warm picture the promotional materials painted? The five and dime's best quality, the thing it actually accomplished, was making the ordinary feel available. The nice lipstick at a price that did not require decision-making. The hot meal at noon at a cost that did not limit who could sit down. The notions and the stationery and the small seasonal pleasures at prices that made them genuinely accessible rather than aspirationally accessible. That was a real gift. It was a gift that arrived wrapped in conditions and exclusions that the official image carefully cropped out. And understanding both of those things simultaneously, the genuine warmth and the genuine limitations, is the only way to understand what the five and dime actually was and what it actually meant. By the early 1970s, the five and dime was already changing in ways that would eventually make it unrecognizable, then make it disappear. The discount store model, pioneered by Kmart and Walmart, had arrived and offered a version of the same low-price philosophy at a much larger scale, with merchandise categories the five and dime could not match, and parking lots designed for a suburban population that had moved away from the main street entirely. The Woolworth stores began to decline. Kresge converted the majority of its five and dime locations into Kmart stores. McCrory struggled. Newbury contracted. The lunch counters were often the last thing to go, because they held onto their customer base longer than the merchandise floors did, because the regulars were loyal in a way that went beyond the practical, because Margaret still wanted her tea at 9:30 and knew exactly where to get it. The last Woolworth store in the United States closed in 1997. The building was still there. The lunch counter in many cases was still there, chrome and formica, solid and unhurried and shaped exactly right for a woman to sit at for 25 minutes with a cup of coffee and feel that the morning was manageable. The stores that replaced the five and dime sold more at lower prices and were easier to get to, and were open every day of the week including Sunday, and could not by any measure replace the thing they replaced. Some things are not a category, some things are a texture, a feeling, a particular temperature of the air in a particular kind of morning. The five and dime was that. The price point was the mechanism, the texture was the point, and the texture was built by the women who worked there, who managed the counters and filled the shelves and poured the coffee and made the thing feel the way it felt. They were not paid for the texture. They were paid for the work. The texture came for free, which was exactly how the five and dime had always operated. The salesgirl at the five and dime occupied a specific position in the taxonomy of American women's work in the post-war decades, and that position was both more visible and less valued than most people who were not in it understood. She was highly visible. She was the human face of the store, present at every counter and every display, the person who completed the commercial transaction and who gave the visit its texture. And she was consistently undervalued. Her work was classified as unskilled, despite requiring a range of physical and social and organizational competencies that were very much skills, and it was compensated accordingly, at rates that placed her in the lower tier of working women's wages, even in a period when working women's wages were already substantially lower than working men's across nearly every occupational category. The post-war period saw a significant expansion of women in the retail workforce, driven partly by the expansion of retail itself as the consumer economy grew, and partly by the reality that retail wages, while low, were a meaningful contribution to household budgets in a period when the two-income family was becoming more common across the working and lower middle class. Women who took five and dime positions in the 1950s and 60s were often doing so for precise economic reasons. The hours worked with school schedules, the positions were accessible without specialized credentials, the stores were geographically convenient in the downtown shopping districts that anchored most American main streets of the era. The choice was practical, the conditions were frequently not. The management structure of a large five and dime chain like Woolworth or Kresge was almost entirely male. Store managers were men. District managers were men. Buyers, the people who made the decisions about what would appear on the shelves and at what price, were predominantly men. The women on the floor, the women behind the counter, the women in the stockroom, occupied the base of a hierarchy that narrowed sharply as it rose, and narrowed primarily along gender lines. This was not a feature of the five and dime specifically. It was the operating structure of American retail broadly in this period. But it had specific consequences for the women inside it, because it meant that the people who set the wages, the hours, the working conditions, and the standards of performance for the salesgirl were people who did not do the work, and were not likely to in the future. and that the appeals mechanism for improving those conditions was limited in practice even when it nominally existed. The dress code requirement that the salesgirl maintain her uniform to company standards operated differently in practice than it did on paper. The standard was set by management. The cost was borne by the employee. The inspection was conducted at the beginning of the shift by the floor supervisor, who had the authority to send a girl home to change if her uniform was not meeting standard, which meant losing that day's wages, which meant the cost of uniform maintenance was effectively enforced as a compliance cost passed entirely to the worker. The girl who could not afford to replace a worn uniform immediately was in a bind that the dress code policy did not acknowledge and the management structure was not required to address. She found a way to manage it herself, borrowing from a colleague, wearing the worn garment and hoping the floor supervisor did not look too closely, delaying a necessary purchase until the next paycheck. The system required her to solve problems that the system itself created. The scheduling in most five and dime operations was also less stable than it was presented at the hiring stage. Part-time positions were common, and the hours attached to them were subject to management discretion, in ways that made it difficult for the women holding them to plan their weeks accurately. A position described as 20 hours per week might be 22 one week and 16 the next, depending on the store's traffic and the manager's assessment of coverage needs. The overtime rules of the period were less protective of part-time workers than of full-time, and the five and dime companies used the part-time classification strategically to maintain scheduling flexibility at the cost of employee stability. The worker who needed a predictable schedule to arrange childcare or coordinate with a second job was frequently managing a system that was not designed to be manageable from her position. The lunch counter raised additional complications that the merchandise floor did not, because the lunch counter's tipping culture intersected with the base wage structure in ways that were ambiguous and often disadvantageous. In theory, tips supplemented the base wage and provided incentive for good service. In practice, the tipping rate at a five and dime lunch counter was inconsistent in ways that correlated with factors beyond the counter girl's control, including the demographic composition of the customer base, the price point of the menu items, and the cultural norms around tipping in that specific community and region. In communities where tipping was common and relatively generous, a good counter girl at a busy store could significantly augment her base pay. In communities where tipping was less common or less generous, she could not. The management's position was that tipping was a voluntary supplement and not a component of the wage structure, which allowed the base wage to be set at a level that required tipping to be genuinely livable and simultaneously disclaimed any responsibility for whether tipping actually happened. The physical toll of the work was also rarely acknowledged in any official accounting of what the job required. The feet were the most common complaint, and there was a whole domestic culture of foot care among counter girls and salesgirls that developed in response to the specific demands of the job. The thick-soled shoes, the foot soaks in warm water with Epsom salts, the particular relief of sitting down for the first time in 9 hours at the end of a shift. Varicose veins were an occupational hazard recognized informally by the women in the work and not at all by the companies employing them. Standing for 8 or 9 hours on hard floors day after day, year after year, produces specific long-term physical effects, and the five and dimes workforce absorbed those effects without any compensating support from the employers who benefited from the work being done. There was also the emotional labour, the managed pleasantness that was required as a condition of continued employment. To call this invisible is not quite accurate, because management noticed it when it failed, noticed it very clearly and quickly when a customer complained that a salesgirl had been short with her, or cold or unfriendly. What was invisible was the cost of maintaining it. Pleasantness that is genuine is not without cost, but the cost is different from the cost of pleasantness that must be performed across a full shift regardless of how you feel, regardless of how the customer behaves, regardless of what else is happening in your life outside the store. The professional mask of the salesgirl was real, and it was maintained with effort, and that effort was not compensated and was not acknowledged as effort. Some women thrived in these conditions, found genuine satisfaction in the work, in the customer relationships, in the competence that developed through repetition and experience. This is true and important and should not be dismissed. The counter girl who loved her work was not suffering false consciousness or making the best of a bad situation. She was finding genuine meaning in something real. The work was skilled, The relationships were genuine. The social function of the lunch counter and the sales floor was real and worth something. What needs to be said alongside that is that the women who found meaning in this work did so under conditions that the system did not design for their comfort, at wages that did not reflect the full value of what they were contributing, and with very limited ability to change those conditions through any mechanism the industry was willing to provide. The contrast between the official image and the operational reality shows up most clearly in the promotional materials that the 5 and dime companies produced over the decades. The salesgirls in the catalogues and the store circulars and the company anniversary publications are uniformly fresh, smiling, apparently unaffected by the weight of the work. They are presented mid-task, reaching for merchandise or pouring coffee or setting a plate down at the lunch counter, and they are presented doing these things with an ease that suggests the work cost them nothing. The smiles are the product of a deliberate aesthetic choice by whoever was making the promotional materials, an aesthetic choice that required showing the service without showing the labour behind the service, because showing the labour behind the service would have complicated the image the 5 and dime was selling, that this was an effortless, welcoming place where everything was arranged for the customer's ease. The women who actually created that ease were most visible when they were least visible. Their competence was the mechanism. The mechanism was supposed to be invisible. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Oh, and if you'd rather just listen, we're on Spotify too, link in the description. This is the gap that sits behind the warm image of the 5 and dime, not as a scandal, not as a simple story of exploitation, but as the specific and ordinary way that mid-century American commercial culture treated the labour of women who were doing work that the culture valued but was not willing to fully value. The stores were warm because the people inside them made them warm. The price of that warmth was paid by the people making it, in wages that did not reflect the skill, in hours that were managed for the company's convenience, in physical costs that were personal rather than institutional, in emotional management that was required and unacknowledged. And the customers who enjoyed the warmth, most of them women themselves, most of them aware in some partial and unexamined way of the dynamic they were participating in, came back every Saturday and sat at the lunch counter and said thank you and meant it. That thank you was not nothing. It was the human exchange that made the counter worth being at, but it was also not a wage. There is something that connects all of it. When you hold tonight's 4 topics alongside each other and let them rest for a moment before you let the night take over completely. The Saturday morning shopper with her $1.71 and her list that is somewhere between need and pleasure. Frank Woolworth in the back room of a failed store in Utica, New York, taking notes on what went wrong and deciding to try again. The counter girl at 5 in the evening, untying her apron, thinking about Margaret who will be back on Tuesday. The institution that promised a democratic welcome and delivered it imperfectly and cost the people inside it more than anyone publicly said. What connects them is not nostalgia exactly. It is something more honest than nostalgia, which tends to flatten things into a warm general glow that leaves out the hard parts. What connects them is the ordinary human experience of making something work inside a system that was not designed for your comfort, with the materials you had in the moment you were given. The shopper making $1 go as far as it could go. The salesman who failed and learned and tried again. The counter girl who turned 9 hours of hard physical and social labour into something that looked, from the outside, like ease. The women who demanded access to a counter that should have been open to them all along. They were all doing what people have always done inside the specific circumstances of their particular American moment. They were building a life, a working life, a daily life, out of what was available. They were finding the small pleasures inside the large demands. The lipstick at 29 cents, the perfect cup of coffee poured at exactly the right moment, the satisfaction of a store built exactly right, entered and navigated and departed with something useful in a paper bag. These are not grand things. They were never grand things. But grand things are not what most life is made of, and the 5 and dime understood that better than almost any other institution of its era. It understood that ordinary was not a consolation prize. It was the whole game. It was the game most people were actually playing. The 5 and dime is gone now, or almost gone, replaced by things that are larger and cheaper and more convenient and less warm. The lunch counter is mostly gone too. The chrome and the formica, and the ceramic mug that held the heat, and Margaret with her 2 sugars and her bag on the side. Some of what was lost was simply change, the natural change of a culture that moved and shifted and found new ways to do the same things. Some of what was lost was genuine, the particular warmth of a space that had earned its warmth through years of being a reliable presence on a main street, through knowing who came in on Tuesdays and what they ordered, through the specific pride of being somewhere that anyone with $1.25 could walk into without apology and leave with something that made the day feel more manageable. That warmth did not come from the fixtures. It did not come from the price points or the candy counter or the seasonal merchandise on the freestanding tables in the middle of the floor. It came from the people inside the stores, the ones who spent their days on their feet making it feel easy, making it feel like the kind of place you would want to come back to next Saturday. The women whose names you did not always know, and whose labour you did not always think about, and who showed up every morning at 7:15 to wipe down the counter before anyone arrived to see it being wiped. Let that sit for a moment as the night gets quieter around you. Let the chrome and the candy and the Saturday mornings and the coffee smell and the sound of that register drawer settle into the back of your mind, where things go when they're done being thought about and are simply being kept. The Five and Dime was a real thing. The people who built it and staffed it and shopped it every week of their adult lives were real people doing something that mattered in the quiet daily way that most mattering happens. Not dramatically, not historically, just continuously, just by showing up. Tonight, somewhere in the specific part of memory where a particular decade smells like something you cannot quite name but would recognise immediately, there is a main street still open, a Five and Dime still lit, a counter still warm. A woman is sitting down with her coffee and 20 minutes and nowhere else to be. The store around her smells like it always smelled. The stool is the right height. The mug is thick enough to hold the heat. She has been on her feet since before the sun was up. The morning is almost over. The afternoon can wait. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you on the next one.